Hey dudes, it's Lerald. Mercenary League is amazing. Coming right out of the gate, hot out the gate. It's an all-time mechanic for me. It might be on the level of Sentinel, honestly. Now, I will say the League launch was less great. I couldn't log in for the first 2 hours on Friday. That was pretty frustrating, and then the servers were unstable over the weekend. You know, welcome to online gaming, I guess. It is what it is. In any case, mercenaries are extremely powerful. I'm currently getting about 50 to 100% extra damage out of my mercenary and around 20% physical damage reduction on top of that. I also have plans to pretty much double both of those numbers once I get a little bit more investment into the character, but more importantly, I have almost no investment into the character. I have gotten a mercenary this strong, double-ish damage, 20% damage reduction for like 20 chaos, maybe 25. It is almost free. And that is what I'm going to talk about in this video, how to make a very strong, very cheap debuff mercenary to boost your damage and defenses for almost nothing. And oh yeah, by the way, it can also clear tier 16 maps solo on top of that. Alright, so let's start with the mercenary basics. There are a bunch of different archetypes, one for every stat combo in Path of Exile. They're all different damage types. They all emulate a normal character build. There's nothing too wacky. There's no like int-based bow characters or dex-based two-handed axe characters, right? There's also no control over the mercenary skills. You find the mercenary, it will have those skills forever. But all of the gear can be replaced. It is destroyed when you replace it. It has to correspond with their preferred stat and weapon type, so if you have a Dex Mercenary or a Dex Int Mercenary, you can throw Dex gear onto them, or Dex gear, or Int gear, or Dex Int gear, but you can't throw Strength gear onto either of those mercs. Now, there are 3 things you can do when you find a mercenary. I think this is all pretty well tutorialized, but you can either hire them, take their stuff, or exile them. I would say that these are actually all quite useful. Exiling them in particular is really good when you're trying to search for a specific type of mercenary, such as a cold or lightning damage ranger, which is what we're using in my current setup. It's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on for the rest of the video. And, rangers are good for several reasons that I'll get into a little bit deeper later on. Now, 90% of the time, I fight the mercenary for the currency they have on hand, if it's worth anything more than like a Chaos Orb. I will check their gear just to make sure there's not like a really good pair of boots with 30-35% move speed and like 100 all res and a big life roll, or like, make sure there aren't any nice uniques. I have seen people talking about getting mirrors from them in the campaign and mage bloods and maps. Anything is possible, it just hasn't happened for me yet. But the point is that they are rewarding. I would say I've gotten a lot of Chaos Orbs from mercenaries, just taking the currency that's in their bag. They can also be pretty dangerous, so you do want to bear that in mind. It is important to stop and look at their skills. If you're fighting like a physical damage, strength-based mercenary that has no mobility skill, it's pretty easy to kite them. If they have Leap Slam or something like that, you want to be prepared for that. If they have some sort of Vol skill, you want to be prepared to dodge that, because I've gotten one-shot by mercenaries a lot. Otherwise, if they don't have good currency and they don't have, they're not a type of mercenary I want to recruit, I will exile them. That means pretty much anything for me other than a pure dex or a pure int-based mercenary, I'm going to exile. You can just walk away. It is the coward's move, but it's probably a smart move, honestly, if you don't want to die for, like, 2 chance orbs or something, but it's something that I don't do. I don't walk away. I would rather fight and die like a moron than flee safely like a coward. Now, I would say there are really 2 main types of setups you can go with in terms of the way that you put your mercenary together. You can either try to use something that's very similar to your build or something that is completely the opposite of your build. And just to talk about those 2, I think going with something similar makes sense. It will complement your build. It'll use skills that you would also use, or like, for example, they can have auras or curses, or ideally both. So you could get like Grace or Haste if you're playing an evasion-based build. Cool. The downside to that is that if the mercenary dies or just moves out of range, you lose the aura that you're kind of counting on to like make you tanky or do more damage. So I don't really love doing that. Also, if you're using a curse, like let's say you're playing a chaos damage build, maybe you're me, you're playing a chaos damage build, you would like to have despair. If the mercenary uses a different curse like flammability or something, that will interfere with the curse limit and overwrite your curse. This is something I ran into a lot with some of the different sniper mercenaries, different ranger mercenaries that would use like Poacher's Mark or Sniper's Mark, something that might be useful for their character, but actively prevents me from applying despair to the enemies that I'm fighting, essentially just giving them an extra 30-something chaos res, which is pretty irritating. So because I am playing a Toxic Rain Pathfinder, my go-to build, I want to find a chaos damage over time build, and generally speaking, like, there is technically a chaos damage over time bow using Mercenary, but it likes to use Mark of Alchemy pretty often, which interferes with me. So the main option for me is to use an Int Mercenary that uses like a staff and applies the Despair Curse. And that's okay. I think her name is a Cruel Mistress. That's the type of mercenary she is. The problem with this is that I didn't find she actually dealt very much damage. The utility was okay, but it was basically like a bad Essence Drain Contagion character. I found a couple during the campaign in early mapping that used Void Sphere and Despair, so they would help CC and debuff monsters, but it wasn't anywhere near as good as the setup I'm using now. So I've gone with the complete opposite. Like I said before, I am using a Mercenary to provide the buffs and debuffs that my build cannot. I am getting Shock, Chill, and Freeze, along with a bunch of other buffs on top of that. So this is Grinna the Trigger Happy. She is another Ranger Mercenary that I'm using, as opposed to Pavora the Saxon Daughter, who you can see I stripped all of her gear off. And one of the big advantages that I'm getting out of Grinna is she is not using a curse at all, so that's not interfering with my ability to despair, which is good. She's also using Vol Grace, and at present I'm not using Grace in my build, but when I am, it's kind of nice to not have to bother to like use Vol Grace, level it up, keybind it extra. You just get a free built-in Vol Grace. I wouldn't be upset if I was getting Grace out of Grinna though, rather than Vol Grace. That would be fine. But what I'm getting here is Ice Shot, Vol Ice Shot, which is a nice little cooldown for big packs, and then Mirror Arrow and Blink Arrow, right? She's really not bringing all that much to the table in terms of utility. She really is just like hitting stuff with Ice Shot to chill it, and then being kind of tanky and hard to hit. And this is something I didn't expect with the Rangers. You know, I expected a lot of damage, I expected them to be fast, and to clear off-screen monster packs. And she's doing all of that. But what I didn't expect was for her to be super tanky. She has 954 life regen per second, which is absolutely crazy, and close to 5k life, while wearing a setup that really has a lot of utility uniques built into it. So you can use other Ranger types as well. I'm just using an Ice Shot one because this is the highest level one that I've found that I was happy with in terms of their skills, but like Lightning Arrow or physical bow skills can work too. Ice Shot's just pretty good right now, and again, this Mercenary doesn't have like an annoying curse or mark. So the main use for her is elemental ailments, and I'm just going to kind of show that off using some of the uniques that I'm really using to take advantage of this here. I'm using Ahuana's Bite to make it so that enemies chilled by my Mercenary's hits will have damage taken increased by the chill effect. And then I'm also using Pain Seeker, which gives added fire, cold, and lightning damage, and then also makes it so that your non-damaging ailments inflict damage or are inflicted as though you have dealt 197% more damage. This is a very wide roll on this pair of gloves, these Pain Seekers, anywhere from 100 to 200. I bought these for, I think, 1 or 2 chaos, despite being a really good roll. And then again, you know, Ahuana's Bite, you chill as though dealing 60 to 100% more damage. These stack with each other. I got a pretty good roll for 1 chaos, 90% more damage. So I'm getting my chills to inflict as though I'm doing 287% more damage with the bow that I have here, which is a fire, cold, lightning damage prefix bow. I think it was like a 700 elemental DPS bow at the time that I bought it. And this is a very different setup from the way that you would put together like a Lightning Arrow Deadeye, where you really care about attack speed. We don't care about bow DPS. We actually just care about the raw damage. We just want a bunch of flat, cold, fire, and lightning damage on the prefixes of our bow. And then if it's slow, that's fine. It's actually better, arguably. Really, we only care about the damage of the hit because we are looking for debuffs rather than actual DPS from our Mercenary. This makes it a lot cheaper to get a bow for a Lightning Arrow Deadeye. You know, in this case, like I went with an assassin bow because it has that implicit global crit multi, and that's just kind of free real estate. You can see this isn't even a 6 mod bow. I'll exalt, like close my eyes and exalt on there eventually and hope that I get like crit multi or something, but this is working for right now. So what I'm doing to really kind of push this to the limit is I'm using Rash Kaldar's Patience, which makes it so that your chance to freeze, chance to shock, and chance to ignite is all 100%. Now you still have to do enough damage per hit in order to freeze and in order to shock, but I mean, ignite, you know, it could be a 1 damage ignite, I don't care, that's fine. because I'm combining that with Pyroshock Clasp. So this is a very, very cheap way to get a lot of damage conversion on enemies. Enemies you ignite have 10 to 15% of the fizz damage they deal converted to fire. Enemies shocked convert 10 to 15% of the fizz damage to lightning. So a double 14 roll is 1 chaos. A 14-15 roll is like 1 or 2 chaos. A double 15 roll, that's more like 20 chaos maybe. You know, just going off of like recent price checking myself. So this is a super common belt, super easy to find, has like okay defensive stats on it, bunch of evasion rating, a bit of life, and then also increased duration of elemental ailments on enemies, kind of to counteract the downside of Rash Kaldar's Patience, which does have that reduced duration of elemental ailments on enemies. But it has a lot of life on it, so, you know, a lot of like defensive value coming out of all of these uniques that are really just there more for like utility purposes. So by converting like 28 to 30% of the physical damage that enemies deal, you know, we're able to get that roughly mass out to about 20 to 22% physical damage reduction, assuming like 0 armor and 75% fire res, which is exactly what I have. I have 0 armor and 75% fire res. So that's perfect, right? It's about 20% damage reduction from fizz. And because we have that high flat fizz, cold, and lightning, we're always shocking and chilling. While our Mercenary is always shocking, chilling, and igniting, thanks to Rash Kaldar's Patience, and then the combination of like Ahuana's Bite and Painseeker are making it so that the shocks are anywhere from like 10 to 20% generally, and the chills are usually like 15 to 30% on most enemies. Then I'm just kind of filling in most of the rest of the gear slots with like cheap pieces to give myself resistances, like this body armor, which just for a bit of cute fun, I threw in like a lightning arrow, Trinity, Mirage Archer, and elemental damage with attacks. She doesn't use any of these skills. I just thought it was fun because every time I would put a piece of gear on her, she would say, like, no gems? What, no gems? And so I put a bunch of gems in there and put it on her, that she still said, what, no gems, which kind of bummed me out, but that's fine. Again, just a pair of rare boots. You can use Eldritch Implicits on these, which I don't have any currency to slap onto this body armor, but I will at some point. But I did with this pair of boots. I got myself a bit of free sapped ground dropping while moving. That's like 6% damage reduction if enemies step onto that. So it's a little bit more damage reduction if you're standing next to your Mercenary. Pretty nice. Just a bit of free real estate that costs like 1 Eldritch currency. Now you'll note that we don't need move speed on the boots here, and this makes it really easy to get like good cheap boots. You don't need move speed on your Mercenary's boots. They're able to move insanely fast, even with negative move speed, which is what mine has. Negative 3% move speed, she still moves as fast as I do, and like we're zoomed out in this area, but like I move this fast and she is moving, she can't move with me in the hideout, but she'll move as fast as I can. So great, don't need move speed, cuts the cost of good boots way, way, way down. And then finally, I'm just throwing in Leer Cast because it's like a 2-3 chaos unique helm, and what it does is it gives 25% reduced damage, bit of life and dex, and then gives both the wearer and nearby allies 50% increased damage. So that makes her into a 50% increased damage bonus for me, which is great. And then also a 25% increased damage bonus for herself, which is also pretty good. And then the final slot I went with, I just got like a bit of fizz and fire damage on a, like just a cheap ring with some life and some resists and a bit of like extra flat damage to help with triggering ignites and, you know, getting enough damage to get like chills and freezes out of Ice Shot. Now there are a couple of other uniques you could use instead. I have pulled up some things here. So I made this spreadsheet coming into the league. I made this spreadsheet, made a video. We put out a video about it, and I've made some updates to it since then. I bumped up Pyroshock Clasp. Now, Calm's Binding is the belt that most people have been using thus far. It makes it so that nearby enemies convert 25% of their fizz damage to fire. People have been using this on their Mercenaries. The problem with it is that because people are trying to use it, and because it's not super common, it's pretty expensive. I think right now, as of time of recording, it's like 70 or 80 chaos a piece. Earlier, it was like 40. I think the price looked like it was rising. It'll probably come back down, but, you know, we're talking about a difference of like, this is at least 40, if not 80 chaos. And this Pyroshock Clasp, which is giving more, it's giving 28% of fizz damage converted to fire, lightning, you know, other stuff, as opposed to only 25. 1 chaos, Pyro-Shock Clasp, 40 to 80 chaos, Callous Binding, and Callous Binding also requires nearby, which a ranger is not going to want to be nearby to enemies. So Callous Binding is a lot harder to use, I think, on a mercenary, unless you are using a strength-based melee mercenary who wants to run in and stand near enemies. Then the Pyro-Shock Clasp, the issue is the Pyro-Shock requires shocking and igniting, which means you need something to accomplish that, and Rash Kaldar's Patience actually does help with that quite a lot. Now, there are a lot of other options in here as well. Perkwill's Toe is actually winding up being pretty cheap so far. It's great if you're playing like a lightning damage build to get lucky damage. That's very good. There are some lightning damage setups that I think can make really good use of this, but I've just been using, for a while I was using Shaper's Seed, getting a lot of life regen out of that, 4% life regen out of that, and that was a 1 chaos unique. I have set up a whole mercenary gear tab. I do kind of recommend doing that, having like just a tab to dump mercenary gear in just in case for later. I also played around with using Lihup of All. Again, just like a lot of resistance and stats and damage on a ring, but ultimately I just went with something that gave like more life and a bit more like flat damage. I thought was good. The percent increased damage is also good though. I think this is like a fine generic ring. Now, my long-term goal is to transition into using Call of the Void and Winterweave together. These are a pair of rings that synergize really well. The issue with using them right now is Call of the Void comes from Uber Elder, so it's like absurdly expensive right now. It's probably going to be expensive all league long. Let's actually just take a look at how much this is even going to cost. It is surprisingly cheap, 33 chaos. I might actually just go buy one before this video is live, to be honest. So the way that it works, though, is it makes it so that all of your damage can chill, all of it, fizz, fire, whatever, but all damage from hits, all the damage you take can chill you. And then it also makes it so that enemies chilled by your hits can be shattered as though they're frozen, that's fine, and then they lessen their damage dealt by half of your chill effect. So if you're getting a 30% chill on enemies, you're getting 15% damage reduction out of that chill. Now the problem is, of course, that all damage taken from hits can chill you. Your mercenary is going to be chilled permanently. That sucks. What you can do to compensate for this is use a Winterweave, which will make the chill effect be reversed. So now instead of a 20% chill like being a bad thing on your mercenary, it's now 20% increased action speed, which is awesome. You also get fire damage, cold damage to attacks, and then a bit of like max life and cold res as well. So pretty good value out of Winterweave, and that is definitely the combo that I'm going to be going with the mercenary. Which, if those numbers are to be believed, if Call of the Void really is only 33 chaos now, it was quite a bit more the last time I'd looked. I'm going to put that setup together like literally as soon as I've finished recording, because that is too, I mean, it will more than double the cost of the build so far. It'll cost like 35 to 40 chaos to use that instead of Thessalio Sign, which is just basically a bit of free extra flat added cold damage and really nothing else going on, but it'll definitely be better than what I've been using so far. All right, so like I said, as soon as I finished recording, I did buy a Call of the Void for 29 chaos and a Winterweave for 1, so combined 30 chaos. Again, more than double the cost of the build. Did 1 map with her, got a Raw Divine, which felt nice. She is doing so much damage, moving faster thanks to the Winterweave, and just doing like, I mean, everything's basically frozen all the time, and they die and then shatter as though they're frozen, so that's removing a lot of on death effects. So I would recommend this combo once you have, however much chaos it costs to get a Call of the Void and Winterweave together on a mercenary. I feel like regardless of what type of mercenary setup, you can basically use this on any of them, but Ranger does seem like it makes the most sense in conjunction with everything else. So 10 out of 10 would highly recommend. Now, I have a lot of other recommendations in this spreadsheet. I will link this. Like I said in the previous video, I really want this to be like a living document, kind of a community resource. So if you have any feedback, give it. If you think I've missed anything or there's some interaction that I'm just not aware of, let me know and I'll try and add that into the spreadsheet. But I've been really happy with the way that everything's been working so far with this setup. It does work really well. It's giving me like quite a lot of added damage, and then also like just the fact that I'm getting chill on enemies is also just feeling pretty nice. All right, one other thing that I want to hit on before I kind of wrap up here is Anoints. So I mentioned that you can use like Eldritch Implicits on any of the rare armor pieces that you use on your Mercenary. That is true, but you can also use Anoints, and they do actually apply to your Mercenary. So Ash, Frost, and Storm is a really cheap one that you can anoint for any sort of Mercenary that's doing elemental damage. It's right here. It's 30% increased elemental damage, which will help with like getting enough damage to freeze, shock, and ignite. Gives you chance to freeze, shock, and ignite, and then also increased effect of your non-damaging ailments. So shock and ignite in this case, if you use brittle sap, like any of those, scorch, in your build, in your setup, then this would be useful for those as well. Don't remember what this cost off the top of the dome. My my in-game is not working for this, but I know where it is in the tree. It is a sepia and 2 crimson, so this is maybe like 10 chaos, maybe less for that anoint, which is very, very cheap for how much added damage reduction, added chill, and so on that it's providing. So as I mentioned, I am going to be replacing those rings. I'm going to be swapping to Call of the Void and Winter Wave. That's going to happen. I think what I'm also going to do, once I have quite a bit more currency available, and I've made a lot of upgrades to my own build, is swap over to a Yoke of Suffering. This is a lot more expensive item. I know that it is. Yeah, it's 11 divines. Right, so that is a lot more expensive. But I do think this is something I'm going to use on my Mercenary because it makes it so that all of your elemental damage is able to shock, which means you're going to get larger shocks. It also gives you increased damage on enemies based on all of the ailments that you've used. And then it just gives you like a bunch of resistances and chance to shock. So the way that you would set this up is, I think you would want to run a fire damage ranger, actually, ideally, and use a combination of Yoke of Suffering, Call of the Void, and Winter Weave all together to be able to hit very hard with like fire damage and get ignites and chill and shock and freeze, I suppose, out of all of those, out of all of that one type of damage, really. I guess it doesn't have to be a fire damage Mercenary. It could be any kind, but you just want to get all 3 of those, ignite, shock, and chill, and then potentially freeze, and get yourself up to 30% increased damage out of Yoke of Suffering, and then also just like a lot of damage reduction out of Call of the Void, and a lot of percent damage increase out of the chill from Ahuana's Bite. All right, I'm in editing. You can see Premiere here. Couple of other thoughts. You probably want to try to get either like poison or bleed in there as well. Potentially another 10% more damage. That's pretty much it. But just every single one of those things that you could possibly get: poison, bleed, chill, shock, freeze, ignite. All of that is going to add a lot of damage. So that's pretty much that. All right, so that's my setup. That is my plan going forward. And, in conclusion, Mercenaries are awesome. I really love how they're forcing me to think differently about item setups and unique interactions. Ahuana's Bite, terrible unique quiver, never useful at all, always a 1 chaos unique. And now I'm using it to give myself 30% more damage, potentially more. I love it, right? I'm definitely going to spend more time playing around with Mercenaries further and using them with other builds. I really can't wait to figure out even more as the league continues. All right, that pretty much covers it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it. And if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching. Bye.